In the heart of the big city, a woman offers a ring in exchange for food for her daughter. She faces cold stares, silent refusals, and the loneliness of one who still insists on keeping her dignity. But an unexpected gesture breaks the routine, raising doubts about intentions and values. What seemed like help turns out to be a cruel test, and the answer changes everything. If this story interested you, subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you are watching from. Let's begin! On a grey morning in New York City, the hurried comings and goings of Fifth Avenue continued as on any other day. Constant honking, umbrellas lined up on the sidewalks, and faces that crossed paths without truly seeing one another. The fine autumn drizzle, with its metallic scent of wet asphalt, was the perfect backdrop for indifference. Each hurried step was a line of defense against the cold, against being late, and primarily against the world that existed beyond one's own interests. In the middle of the urban flow, where few notice what is outside their field of interest, a woman held a small piece of her own history between her fingers. Isabella Newman, 29, was not a figure who begged for attention. She moved with the discretion of someone who had already learned that invisibility was often a protection. However, on that day, protection didn't matter. The urgency was greater. Between her slender fingers, stained by street dust, a simple golden ring gleamed with discreet scratches on its edges. To most, it would have no value, perhaps just cheap metal, an aesthetic or sentimental miscalculation. But for her, the truth was different. That ring was all that remained of what was once an ordinary life. It wasn't just an object, it was the last fragment of a home, of a promise that life had broken without warning. Isabella kept her chin high, a silent stubbornness in her demeanor, even as the cold bit and her daughter's stomach showed signs of desperation. Beside her, inside a supermarket cart covered by a thin blanket, slept Lara, her 6-year-old daughter. Lara's face, partially hidden by a worn red beanie, was Isabella's moral compass, the reason she wouldn't bend. The child huddled, her sleep light and intermittent, betraying the fragility of the life they led. The child's desperation was what propelled her to stand firm. Isabella had a code of honor. She didn't ask for handouts, didn't extend her hand, didn't carry signs. She had a respect for her own dignity that surpassed hunger and exhaustion. Instead, she discreetly approached those who seemed less indifferent, searching in others' eyes for a flicker of humanity that she knew was increasingly rare. She extended the ring with a firm but serene voice, a voice that didn't beg, but offered a pact of exchange, of survival. "Will you buy my ring?" "My daughter is hungry." The response invariably was a wall of rejection. Most people averted their gaze, as if the sight of Isabella was a flaw in the beautiful panorama of Fifth Avenue, something to be corrected with distraction. Some pretended not to hear, quickening their pace, fiddling with their cell phones with fabricated urgency. Others, more audacious and perhaps moved by a sense of guilt, even offered coins, but refused the ring as if touching the pain of others was too heavy a burden to carry in their pockets. Charity was easy. The commitment to acknowledge humanity in exchange for a personal object was what most avoided. Isabella was on the verge of giving up, of accepting that perhaps the only way was to bow to the humiliation of begging, when the grey routine of Fifth Avenue was interrupted. A man of impeccable posture, a tailored suit, and an unshakable demeanor paused for a second. Caleb Matthews was a name that resonated in the marble corridors of New York's financial power. A CEO who had transformed algorithms into billions, founder of one of the country's largest fintechs, he was respected, feared, and rarely surprised. His days were marked by timed meetings, data-driven decisions, and a refined skepticism about anything involving emotion. Caleb observed the scene with an analytical, detached gaze. It wasn't compassion that filled his face. It was something deeper, almost technical. The man's coldness contrasted with the silent urgency of the mother. Isabella saw him but held no illusions. Men like him saw misery as a statistical data point, a problem to be optimized, not a life to be saved. Caleb Matthews had already invested in social causes for image strategy, but never out of faith in humanity. His mind operated on risk and return spreadsheets. However, something about that woman pulled him off script. It wasn't the request itself. It was the manner. Isabella wasn't begging. She was offering something in return, even in her most extreme vulnerability. She proposed a transaction, a dignified exchange for survival. This violated Caleb's mental projections, who believed that when pressured, all people would yield to their own interests. The woman's stubbornness in maintaining a vestige of her personal worth intrigued him. She was an anomalous variable in his mathematical model of human behavior. Caleb was late for a business lunch worth millions, but curiosity held him back. Without a word, he took the ring, feeling the roughness of the metal. He observed it for an instant, as if analyzing the market value of an asset. Isabella expected refusal, a coin tossed down from above, but what happened surprised her. Caleb, to Isabella's surprise, returned the ring inside a small box, now accompanied by a brown envelope. The gesture was cold, almost robotic. Before she could even formulate a question, he simply said with the grave, authoritative voice of someone who tolerates no interruptions, that he would return the next day at 8 p.m., and that she was free to do what she wanted with what he had given her. Then he turned and continued his impeccable march down the sidewalk, as if the scene of seconds before was merely a small logistical deviation in his meticulously planned life. Isabella stood motionless, the brown envelope burning in her hands. It wasn't the money that shocked her, but the absence of emotion in that man. He didn't look at her with pity nor with contempt. He looked at her as if she were an object of study. She only opened the envelope hours later, when Lara began to complain of a stomachache, a sound that cut a mother's heart more than any horn. Inside, there was enough money to ensure shelter and food for weeks. It was a fortune, an unexpected salvation, but the dilemma wasn't about the value, but about what that gesture represented. Isabella, who had dropped out of psychology college to care for her sick mother and young brother, and who had lost everything in a fake rental scam, knew how to identify tests when she saw them. This wasn't help. It was an experiment, a look into human behavior, coming from someone who treated emotions as variables in a spreadsheet. She felt like a rat in a maze, and what was in the envelope was the cheese. The test, she concluded, was about how quickly she would succumb to temptation. Whether she would keep her word, whether she would return the next day, or whether she would disappear, swallowed by the city with the amount in hand. During the day, Isabella hid the envelope as one protects something dangerous. It brought not only comfort, but a threat to her autonomy. She walked through familiar places, feeling the weight of the decision. She thought about giving part of the money to other mothers in an act of solidarity to mitigate the guilt. She considered buying medicine for her daughter, which was the priority. She even contemplated returning to the past and, for the first time in years, sleeping under a roof with clean sheets. The vision of a warm bath and Lara sleeping in a soft bed was almost unbearable in its attraction, but the memory of her own history haunted her. She carried not only her daughter, but the conviction that it was still possible to survive without selling herself. That money, easy and unattached, seemed dirty, conditioned on her submission. Meanwhile, the cold transaction on Fifth Avenue had taken on a life of its own. Someone had filmed the brief encounter between her and Caleb, a video of a few seconds showing only a man in a tie, handing an object to a humble-looking woman. The title, posted by an influencer, was enough to ignite the internet. Mysterious CEO gives gift to homeless woman. New romance or marketing stunt? In hours, the video had reached millions of views. Opinions were divided between praise for Caleb, for his supposed generosity, and insults to Isabella, who for many was taking advantage. For Isabella, the result of the viralization was immediate and cruel. She was barred from the shelter where she usually slept. Gossip, quick and poisonous, turned her into a pariah. Mothers with whom she shared soup began to avoid her. Some said she had sold out, that she had traded her dignity for crumbs from the world of the rich. Others said she was taking advantage, that she had found an easy shortcut to life while they still struggled. That gesture, which for Caleb was an experiment, for Isabella was social isolation. The money, instead of freedom, chained her. That night, under an empty awning, with Lara sleeping feverishly and the brown envelope beneath her body, Isabella made her decision. She looked at the ring on her finger, the last link to her past life, and felt that it was the only truly remaining thing. The chance to shelter, to have food, was tempting, but the idea of having to account to Caleb the next day, of being the living proof of his skeptical thesis, was unbearable. She would not be the manipulated variable in his life spreadsheet. The next day, punctually at 8 p.m., Isabella returned to the same agreed spot on Fifth Avenue. Her heart beat with the anxiety of the test, but her mind was clear. She held the closed box firmly. The ring was back in its original place, untouched. When Caleb approached, with the same posture of power and indifference, she extended the object without hesitation. He stared at her, expecting some justification, perhaps tears of gratitude, perhaps a poignant story about how the money had saved Lara. He expected a logical conclusion, based on his cost-benefit analysis, but Isabella simply said with the same firm voice as always that she didn't need the money. Not as a burden, not with doubt hovering over her worth. She refused not only the money, but the narrative that came with it. Caleb for a moment did not respond. His brain, accustomed to calculating human reaction with the precision of an algorithm, froze. His mental models had failed once again. The woman in front of him, the most vulnerable variable of his experiment, had broken all rules and expectations. He felt strangely disarmed, confused, irritated, not with her, but with the failure of his own analytical omniscience. What was this act of stubbornness? What kind of person, living on the street, would refuse financial salvation? He looked at the box in his hand, at the golden ring, and at Isabella's tired but firm face. What he saw was not a beggar, but a silent resistance. Why? He finally managed to ask, his voice lower than usual, denoting the crack in his wall of indifference. Isabella didn't hesitate. The person's worth isn't in what they accept, Caleb. She didn't give him the title of Mr., which increased his surprise. And I am not for sale. My ring was an exchange, an honest transaction. This, she gestured to the box he held, as a price I am not willing to pay. He wanted to argue, to explain that it was just money, a practical solution, that dignity was a luxury she couldn't afford. But the words died in his throat. He, the man who transformed data into discourse and discourse into power, was speechless. Caleb simply nodded, an almost imperceptible movement, and walked away. That encounter had affected him in a way that years of risky negotiations had not. He didn't know what Isabella had done with the money. She hadn't touched it, but the fact that she had returned the closed box meant that she had chosen the arduous struggle instead of the easy way out. Isabella, in turn, felt the overwhelming relief of being true to herself. She might not have money, but her story was intact. She pushed the cart with Lara, feeling strangely lighter, even though the night remained cold and hunger had not disappeared. Days later, the cold and calculating CEO had a non-financial problem. Caleb couldn't get Isabella out of his head. The failure in his behavior model disturbed him. Out of initial curiosity, he began a discreet investigation. He wanted to understand the anomaly. It was then that he discovered something that led him into a universe he never imagined existed. He found out that Isabella Newman was the anonymous author of small reflective texts circulating among shelters, support groups, and alternative social networks. Texts signed only as IN, they were small fragments of resistance and hope, encouraging homeless people to keep their identity intact, even in the face of social rejection. She wasn't just a mother, she was a voice. Caleb found himself immersed in anonymous forums and low-visibility publications, reading words that contradicted his entire life philosophy. Isabella wrote about the richness of the soul, about the bankruptcy of compassion, and about the right to exist without asking for forgiveness. He discovered that she had written an entire notebook, hidden in public libraries and churches, using borrowed pencils and old paper. The image of the billionaire, in his glass office overlooking the city, reading a manifesto of resistance, written with a borrowed pencil by a woman sleeping on the street, was a painful irony. But Caleb's search soon became more urgent. He also discovered that she had disappeared. There was no more news of IN in the shelters. No one had seen her with the girl. Isabella had vanished, perhaps swallowed by the very invisibility that protected her, but which now hid her definitively. From that moment, the story of Caleb Matthews and Isabella Newman became a hunt. Caleb tried to find her for days, without fanfare, without cameras, without image consultants. The search was personal. He visited support centers, talked to volunteers, read accounts in online forums, and, for the first time, began to review his own past. where he himself had erased names and faces he had helped from a distance, but never truly wanted to know. He realized that his charity was a form of control, of maintaining distance. Isabella's figure disconcerted him because she asked for nothing, because she didn't fall into the expected script, and because for the first time in a long time, he felt small before the silent greatness of someone who had refused not only money, but what came with it: emotional debt, narrative debt, debt of submission. He, the man who bought everything, had been refused. That no from Isabella was the greatest threat to his ego, to his certainty that the world was governed by interests and numbers. New York City seemed to conspire in favor of Isabella's silence. Fifth Avenue was once again gray and indifferent. Days turned into weeks. Caleb was obsessed, but his obsession wasn't with an investment or an acquisition. It was with an answer that defied his logic. He had failed to understand non-monetary value. The turning point came unexpectedly. It was in a community library on the East Side, a place he would never have visited in his previous life. He was there, disguised in a baseball cap and casual clothes, rummaging through piles of books and pamphlets when he found a clue, a notebook left by a visitor who left no name, but whose content was unmistakable. There, on pages stained by watermarks and intense annotations, were excerpts of texts identical to those Caleb had read in forums. It was the voice of IN, the indomitable spirit of Isabella recorded in ink and paper. He leafed through the pages with a mixture of hope and guilt. He felt like an intruder in that sanctuary of thoughts. But what touched him most was a sentence written on the back cover, unsigned, a kind of code of honor that Isabella had left for the world, or perhaps for herself. You can lose everything, except the right to decide who you are. That wasn't just a manifesto. It was a reminder, the key to understanding the refusal of money, the strength behind the fragility. Isabella had stripped herself of material possessions, but she had clung to her identity with the strength of someone drowning. Caleb closed the notebook, feeling the weight of that old paper. He finally understood the dimension of the flaw in his algorithm. Human behavior could not be reduced to financial variables. There was a force, a silent greatness, that defied the logic of capital. Without knowing if he would see her again, if she was well, or if she had been lost in the vastness of the city, Caleb understood that his journey with Isabella was not about charity, nor about redemption. It wasn't about him saving her. It was about what happens when someone resists the narrative the world tries to impose, and about the silence that screams louder than any headline. That fleeting encounter, the refusal of the ring, the notebook on the East Side, all had shifted the axis of his universe. He, the man of billions, was now on a desperate search for a woman who refused the chance to be saved by him. The story seemed to have inverted. As he held the notebook, the library door opened, and a cold wind brought with it the smell of rain. Caleb looked up, ready to hide the notebook, when he saw a figure at the entrance, a woman with a worn red beanie. It was Lara. She was with an older lady, a library volunteer, but her eyes immediately fixed on Caleb, with the curiosity and fear of a child who had already seen too much. Caleb felt his heart race. He was one step away from Isabella, but he knew he couldn't approach abruptly, not after what the media had done with their last encounter. He put the notebook in his backpack, acting with the dissimulation of a spy. He watched Lara snuggle up to the volunteer, who handed her a glass of milk. The girl seemed better cared for than last time, but her eyes remained sad. He needed a plan, a strategy that involved neither money nor power. He needed to approach Isabella on her own terms, in the universe of affection and discretion. He stood up, but instead of going towards Lara, he went to the librarian's desk asking for information about support groups for single mothers in the area. He knew that discretion was the only currency she would accept. The librarian, a warm lady named Mrs. Eleanor, gave him some names. "You look like a businessman. Why so much interest?" she asked with a gentle smile. Caleb hesitated for a second. "I'm studying a new form of social investment, something that goes beyond donation," he lied. But the lie contained a newly discovered truth, something that respects people's autonomy. Mrs. Eleanor looked at him with a glimmer of understanding. "Autonomy is everything. No one wants to be a project, Caleb. People want to be seen. The owner of the notebook you were looking at," she pointed to the desk where he had left the object before putting it away, Thysenfurt, as we call her. She understands that. She was here recently with the girl. She's a force of nature. But she's scared. The internet video destroyed her. Caleb's heart skipped a beat. She was here? Where is she now? She went to the church nearby. They have an evening program for mothers who need a place to stay. But they only accept you if you're discreet. And Isabella is very discreet, said Mrs. Eleanor. Caleb thanked her, the urgency in his chest almost suffocating him. The chance was there. He rushed out of the library, feeling the cold rain on his face. It wasn't just the chance to find her, but the chance to understand. In the church, the dimness of the nave was comforting. Caleb found Father Richard, a man with an open smile who received him with the usual curiosity of someone seeing an expensive suit in a simple setting. "I'm looking for a woman, Father. Isabella Newman," he said, straight to the point. Father Richard analyzed him. "She is discreet, my son. If she doesn't want to be found, not even God can force her." "I know, but I'm not here to force her. I'm the man from the video," Caleb confessed, the honesty surprising him. "I was the fool who made her a target. I need to fix this." The father, accustomed to confessions of all kinds, perceived the genuine anguish in the CEO's voice. "She's in the sacristy, but if I bring her to you and if she feels invaded, you will have lost the only chance to prove you are different." "I understand," Caleb said. "Tell her I have something that belongs to her, something that isn't money, and that I would like to return it in a neutral place, tomorrow's community breakfast here in the square. If she comes, I'll be there. If she doesn't, I'll understand." Father Richard nodded, a wrinkle of hope on his brow. He walked towards the sacristy. Caleb waited in the dim light, Isabella's notebook in his hands, feeling the inversion of his role. He was no longer the giver, he was the supplicant. In the sacristy, Isabella heard the message with a heavy heart. The notebook. He had found her notebook. It wasn't about money. It was about her thoughts, her soul recorded on old paper. That object was worth more than the ring. What did he want in return? She was exhausted by mistrust, but the risk of losing that record of her history was too great. "I'll go," she told the father, her voice firm. She wouldn't run away. She would face the challenge. She would reclaim her notebook and once again prove that she was more than the narrative the world had imposed on her. The game had changed, but Isabella was ready to play. The next morning in the square, Caleb waited anxiously. He wasn't in a suit. He wore a simple jacket and jeans. He looked like an ordinary man, a businessman who had stopped for coffee. He saw Isabella approach, with Lara in her arms. She didn't look stronger, but she looked more determined. "How you came," he said, a contained smile. "The notebook," she retorted without preamble. Caleb handed her the notebook, saying nothing more. Isabella took it, quickly flipping through it, relief crossing her face as she saw her notes intact. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "You're the only one who didn't try to buy me." "I tried," he confessed. "But you taught me that value isn't in the price, Isabella. I read your notebook, your texts. They have the honesty that my algorithms lack. I want to propose something to you, Isabella. It's not charity, it's not marketing, it's an investment. Not in money, but in an idea. I want you to write. I want you to give a voice to these people, on a platform that won't be sold. You will be the content director of a new foundation, based on autonomy and identity. You will have an income, a home, and most importantly, the right to write your own script." Isabella looked at him, at the man who stood there, vulnerable, and not at the billionaire CEO. She saw the honesty in his eyes. The revelation wasn't the money. It was the change. "And what's your part, Caleb? What's the return on this investment?" she asked, suspicious but curious. "My return, Isabella," he said, looking at Lara, who gazed at him with the sweetness of a saved child, "is the proof that I was wrong, and the chance to rewrite my own story, alongside someone who has the courage to be who they are." The proposal was audacious, a twist worthy of a novel. Isabella wouldn't be saved. She would be the savior of her own cause. She wouldn't be the victim, but the protagonist. "I accept, Caleb," she said, a smile appearing on her face for the first time in a long time. "But I'll do it my way, without algorithms and with a lot of heart. And that's how the story of Isabella Newman and Caleb Matthews began to be written anew on Fifth Avenue, with a golden ring, a notebook on the east side, and the promise of a new life, proving that the greatest power lies in dignity. Caleb's proposal was not just a job offer, it was a complete turnaround in Isabella's life. Fifth Avenue had witnessed the cold transaction of the ring, and now the simple square on the east side became the stage for an unexpected pact. The sun rose timidly over the trees in the square, painting Lara's worn red beanie golden. The girl, clutching her mother's notebook, seemed to sense the change in the air. That object, stained and intense, was proof that her mother's identity was worth more than a CEO's money. Isabella pressed the notebook against her chest. Caleb's proposal resonated in her ears with the force of a hymn of liberation. "I accept, Caleb, but I'll do it my way, without algorithms and with a lot of heart." That yes was not a sign of surrender, but of conquest. She had challenged the logic of a man who turned everything into numbers, and instead of being bought, she was negotiating her own dignity and that of her cause. Caleb Matthews felt a relief mixed with an enthusiasm he hadn't experienced since the launch of his first major fintech. This was a risky business, different from any he had done before, because it involved the most unpredictable variable of all: faith in humanity. He smiled back, a genuine smile that dismantled some of his impeccable armor. "It's the only way it can work, Isabella. Your way. We won't just give. We will give back the voice, the autonomy, the story." At that moment, both their lives were being rewritten. Caleb, who lived in a world of timed meetings and refined skepticism, was now allied with a woman who had lost everything in a fake rental scam, but who carried the conviction that it was possible to survive without selling herself. The first challenge, however, was not work, but shelter. Caleb provided a small apartment on the same east side, discreet and functional, so Isabella could start over without the weight of luxury or the burden of the media. The first night under clean sheets was a moment of almost sacred quiet. Lara, instead of the supermarket cart, slept in a real bed, and Isabella's body, though exhausted, felt the comfort of a roof that wasn't an awning. But the new reality brought with it a new kind of pain. The media. The video continued to go viral. The influencer who had posted the original video doubled down, inventing a plot of secret romance and abandonment after the supposed night of passion. Isabella's life had been turned into a digital circus, and now, with the sudden change of address, the comments became even crueler. The mothers from the shelters who avoided her now saw her as living proof that she had indeed sold her story. Caleb, accustomed to managing billion-dollar image crises, tried to intervene. His communication team suggested an official statement, a press conference, revealing the truth. "We need to combat the narrative with reality, Isabella," he argued, in one of their first work meetings, now held in the living room of that modest apartment. Isabella shook her head, her face serious. "No, Caleb, reality doesn't interest them. Reality is boring. They want drama and betrayal. If I expose myself, I'll feed the beast. The narrative must be fought with silence and work." She pointed to the notebook. "My answer isn't for the internet. It's for the people on the street who feel lost, who think they've lost the right to decide who they are. Our foundation, Voice Unsold, will be proof that dignity is priceless." This was the new Caleb, forced to follow Isabella's logic. He, the master of marketing, now practiced strategic silence. His role was to provide the structure, technology, and resources for IN's voice to echo. The work began with the discretion of a whisper. Isabella started transcribing her notebook and organizing small texts, transforming them into support material. The Voice Unsold Foundation was born focused on one principle: help should not come as a debt, but as an investment in identity. The idea was not just to provide soup and blankets, but to create support groups where people could write, express themselves, and thus keep their humanity intact, challenging social rejection. Caleb, in his Fifth Avenue office, kept the new venture hidden from his partners and family. He couldn't explain that he was spending part of his time and fortune on a project that yielded no financial return and was managed by a former homeless woman. The skepticism of his peers was something he still feared, and the need to protect Isabella from her own fame was a priority. One of his biggest problems was Marcella, his fiancée. Daughter of a banking magnate, Marcella was as cold and calculating as Caleb was before meeting Isabella. She saw marriage as a business merger, a perfect alignment of fortunes and power. She had seen the video and constantly questioned him about the marketing dirt he was getting into. "Do you think I'm naive, Caleb? A man in your position doesn't waste time with charity by faith," she said at a cold, formal dinner. "What did that woman offer you that I can't? Is it passion, or is it just another one of your social tests?" Caleb tried to remain calm. "It's not a test, Marcella. It's an anomaly. Isabella challenged my models. She is proof that dignity exists, and I am funding that proof." "Dignity doesn't pay the bills, Caleb, but scandal does," Marcella retorted, narrowing her eyes. She had dedicated herself to thoroughly investigating Isabella's life and had found some facts Caleb was still unaware of. She was about to use them as a weapon. The tension between the two increased. Caleb was distancing himself from his life of wealth and delving into a universe of simplicity and ideals, which was incomprehensible to Marcella. He no longer saw life in black and white. He had found colors in Isabella's resistance. Meanwhile, Isabella immersed herself in work. She began visiting shelters and community libraries with the discretion of a shadow, recruiting volunteers, and most importantly, encouraging other INs to write their stories. Caleb's foundation, previously a cold name on paper, was coming to life. It was during one of these visits, at a support center in the Lower East Side, that Isabella encountered a figure from her past. Julian, her younger brother, whom she had cared for after their mother's illness. Julian was a talented young man, but he had fallen in with bad company after their mother's death and the rental scam. Isabella had lost sight of him months ago, and the reunion was painful. "Did you sell out, Isabella?" Julian asked, his voice choked with resentment and envy. He had seen the video and the comments. "You're living in an apartment and we're here eating scraps. And you who taught us about honor accepted money from a rich man." Isabella felt tears welling up, but she stood firm. She couldn't expose the truth of the pact with Caleb, as that would put him at risk. "I didn't sell out, Julian. I negotiated my chance to change things for all of us. I am the director of a foundation. I am working, not asking for handouts." "It's the same thing. You got out of the mud and left us in it," Julian accused, turning to leave. "No," Isabella called after him. "I have a chance for you. I need help at the foundation. I need someone who trusts me. Come work with me, Julian. Get out of here." Julian's hesitation was visible. The temptation of an easy life was strong, but his sister's appeal, the only family he had left, spoke louder. "I'll think about it, Isabella. I'll call you." The reunion with Julian brought a complication that Isabella couldn't ignore. She needed to protect him, to bring him into the light, but feared that his presence in the apartment could expose her and Lara to old problems. The next day, Caleb sought her out at the apartment. He had a tense expression. "Marcella is pressuring me, Isabella. She hired a detective to find out who you are and what our relationship is. She's obsessed with the idea that there's more than charity in this story." Isabella listened attentively. "I know. My brother Julian found me. He accuses me of selling out. If he exposes himself or is investigated, our entire operation of discretion will fall apart. We need a plan." "The plan," Caleb said, looking her in the eyes, "is to force Marcella's hand. She wants a romance narrative. We'll give it to her, but we'll control the script. We need a facade." Isabella was shocked. "Facade? What are you talking about?" "I'm going to break off my engagement with Marcella," Caleb declared, the decision cold and calculated like a CEO's. "And I'm going to announce that you are my new consultant and my girlfriend. A story of overcoming adversity that the media will love. You'll have access to my fortune and my influence. You'll be protected, and most importantly, if Marcella tries to use your past to destroy you, she'll have to destroy me too. It's the only way to shield ourselves." Caleb's proposal was a masterstroke, a twist worthy of the boldest dramas. She was no longer the former homeless woman. She was the billionaire's girlfriend, a heroine who rose through her intelligence and dignity. But for Isabella, the idea was dangerous. She hated the thought of using a lie to fight a lie. "You're proposing a lie, Caleb. What if I actually fall in love?" Isabella asked, feeling a chill down her spine. The forced proximity between them, the long hours of work, the mutual admiration, had already created a tension that went beyond the professional. The CEO and the activist formed an improbable but fascinating pair. Caleb averted his gaze. "That's the risk we'll have to take. Our lives are intertwined now. Think of Lara and the Foundation. Think of your mission. It's a necessary sacrifice to secure the voice you want to give these people." Isabella pondered. Lara's safety and the survival of the Voice Unsold Foundation were the priority. Identity was important, but her daughter's life and the voice of hundreds of people were more so. "All right, Caleb, I accept your plan. But with one condition," she said, raising her chin. "This love story will be mine. I'll write the script, and we'll do everything to ensure the main narrative isn't the romance, but the foundation and the cause. I won't be your puppet, Caleb. I'll be your partner in every sense, including this one." Caleb nodded, feeling a pang of something he couldn't identify, perhaps admiration, perhaps fear of that woman's strength. The breakup with Marcella was explosive. Marcella accused him of betrayal, of madness, of destroying the empire they were building. Caleb, however, used all his coldness and logic to argue that the engagement was no longer a strategic asset, and that he was following the path of his own interests. The news spread like wildfire, and the media prepared for the spectacle. The next day, Caleb called a press conference, not at his fintech company, but at a community center that Isabella's foundation had just revitalized. The setting was the opposite of luxury. "I'd like to introduce you to the new direction of my life," Caleb said, before a crowd of skeptical journalists. "This is Isabella Newman. She is not just a mother who fought for her daughter's dignity. She is the founder of a movement that is transforming the lives of hundreds of people who have lost their voice. She is my consultant, my life partner, and the one responsible for showing me that the greatest investment we can make is not in algorithms, but in the autonomy and identity of the human being." The shock was immediate. The cameras turned to Isabella, who was impeccable, but with the same firmness in her gaze. She didn't smile for the cameras. She just spoke about the Foundation's work, about the need to humanize charity, and about every person's right to write their own story. The narrative of the passionate CEO had been overshadowed by the narrative of the resilient activist. Marcella, watching on television, felt the overwhelming fury of defeat. She had been replaced not by a sexy and powerful rival, but by an idea, by a cause. She knew the love story was a facade, but Caleb's passion for Isabella's project was real, and that terrified her. She called her detective. She needed something that could destroy Isabella forever. She needed a dirty past. Meanwhile, Julian, who was watching the press conference in a shelter, saw the determination in his sister's eyes. He realized that she hadn't sold out. She had earned her place at the negotiating table. The scene gave him the courage he needed. He called Isabella, accepting the invitation to work at the Foundation. Isabella's life stabilized, but the tension with Caleb increased daily. They lived under the same roof, playing the role of a passionate couple for the world, but with every exchanged glance, every discussion about the Foundation's future, the line between acting and reality became thinner. They had a common cause, but the attraction between them was undeniable. The turning point came on a cold night, as they worked late in their makeshift office. Caleb was frustrated with the Foundation's legal bureaucracies. "I'm good with numbers, Isabella, but I'm terrible with emotions. I don't understand why people can't just accept help." "Why is dignity more important than a roof?" he asked, his voice choked. Isabella put down her pen. She approached him, and with a gentleness he would never have expected from himself, touched his face. "Because dignity is the last refuge, Caleb. It's what keeps us from yielding to our own interests when life presses us. You saw it in me. I saw it in you. Your search for me wasn't about money. It was about your own dignity, about your chance to be a person who truly cares." In that moment, far under the glow of the desk lamp, the boundary between the CEO and the activist, between the farce and the truth, broke. They kissed, a kiss laden with relief, admiration, and a passion that had been born in skepticism and blossomed in resistance. It wasn't a magazine cover romance. It was the union of two souls who had been transformed by a golden ring and a notebook of ideas. But the drama was far from over. In her luxurious Fifth Avenue apartment, Marcella had received her detective's report. She smiled coldly. It wasn't a love secret. It was a family secret. She held in her hands the revelation that could not only destroy Isabella, but also shake Caleb's life in an unimaginable way. The report detailed Isabella's past, the abandoned psychology degree, her mother's illness, her brother. But what mattered was the story of the ring. The detective had traced the jeweler who had worked on the piece. And the truth was that the ring did not belong to Isabella. The ring was in fact a relic, a family heirloom that Isabella had found years ago, the day she was evicted. She kept it as the only valuable thing she had left. But Marcella's detective had discovered that the ring, with its discreet scratches, belonged to a family that had lost its fortune and its daughter in a tragic accident more than 20 years ago. The missing daughter was the key to Marcella's revenge. She discovered that the child of that family, whose death was never confirmed, but who disappeared after the accident, had a name that surprisingly connected to Caleb. Marcella's revelation was armed. Caleb was not just in love with the activist. He was unknowingly getting involved in a story of family reparation that would shake the foundations of his own empire. The plot was not just about dignity and money. It was about a past that refused to be erased. Marcella prepared her final move. She would schedule a meeting with Caleb to reveal the truth, not to destroy him, but to force him back to her, using emotional blackmail as her most powerful weapon. She was ready to prove that in the end, feelings were just variables that she, not Isabella, knew how to manipulate. The next phase of the game would require more than honesty from Isabella. It would require the courage to face a past she had tried to hide her entire life. The kiss in the dim light of the makeshift office had sealed the fate of Isabella Newman and Caleb Matthews. It was no longer a media charade. It was a real passion, built on mutual admiration and commitment to the Voice Unsold Foundation. They were living proof that dignity and heart could flourish, where before only numbers and despair existed. Caleb saw in Isabella the purity he had lost, and she saw in him the chance to transform the power of capital into something human and meaningful. The Voice Unsold Foundation expanded rapidly. With Caleb's resources and Isabella's vision, they not only provided shelter and food, but organized writing workshops, support groups, and microcredit so that vulnerable people could build their own autonomy. Isabella's story, the former homeless woman who became a director, was the narrative that inspired hundreds. Julian, Isabella's brother, finally joined the foundation, working diligently to prove his worth and redeem himself from the past. His presence was a constant reminder of the fragility of the life they had left behind and the need to protect this new reality. However, the luxury of Isabella's new life was a thorn. She felt out of place amidst gala dinners and business meetings, where superficiality contrasted with the intense reality of the streets she frequented daily. She used Caleb's events as a platform for the foundation, transforming each social appearance into an opportunity to speak about the identity and autonomy of her people. The real threat, however, lay in Marcella's cold hands. Consumed by envy and the feeling of having been replaced by a cause, she had made revenge her sole reason for living. The detective's report on the golden ring was the bomb she was waiting to detonate. She had found the link, the tragic connection that tied Isabella's past to a dark secret in Caleb's life. Marcella scheduled a meeting with Caleb, claiming she needed to discuss the division of some business assets. They met in an isolated cafe away from the media's eyes. Caleb was tense but confident in his decision. His love for Isabella was his new compass. "You look different, Caleb. Lighter but more naive," Marcella began, sipping her coffee with cold calm. "I guess the poor heroine is doing you good. Or maybe you just like playing with fire." "I'm happy, Marcella, and I'm not here to talk about my personal life," Caleb replied, direct. Marcella smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She pulled a copy of the detective's report from a brown envelope. "Of course you are, because your personal life is now your biggest risk asset. Do you remember the story your mother used to tell? The story of your grandmother's wedding ring, which went missing after the accident? The ring with the discreet scratches?" Caleb's blood ran cold. His family had suffered a tragic car accident 20 years ago. His parents had survived, but his older sister Eliza had disappeared, and her body was never found. The family reported her missing and subsequently presumed her dead, which was the trauma that shaped Caleb's coldness. His mother, in particular, never got over her daughter's disappearance and kept her grandmother's ring as her last memory of her, until the ring mysteriously disappeared amidst the chaos of moving after the event. "What does this have to do with Isabella?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Marcella slid the photo of the ring across the table. It was Isabella's ring. The detective traced the jeweler. He confirmed that the ring belonged to your grandmother, and then to your mother. It disappeared from your parents' house shortly after Eliza's accident. Isabella wouldn't steal. Caleb snapped, defending her with a ferocity that surprised Marcella. Perhaps not. But she found it, didn't she? And the most interesting thing is who the jeweler identified as the last person to handle it. It was given for polishing by a woman, exactly 20 years ago. A woman who, curiously, had the same physical features as Isabella's mother before she got sick. Caleb felt his head spin. Isabella found it on the street. She picked it up because it was the only valuable thing she had left. Oh, Caleb, life isn't a romance. The detective discovered that Isabella's mother worked for a brief period, 20 years ago, as a domestic worker in your parents' house, right after the accident. She was hired to help organize the move, and she disappeared shortly after the ring went missing. The implication was clear. Brutal, Isabella's mother was the thief of the ring, and Isabella had grown up with an object stolen from the Matthews family. The woman who had taught him about dignity and honor carried the weight of a past crime committed by her family. "You're fabricating a story, Marcella." "There's no proof." Caleb tried to argue, but the coincidence was overwhelming. "I don't need proof to destroy your heroine. Just leak the story." The passionate CEO who gets involved with the daughter of the woman who stole from his family. Your empire will be shaken, your credibility destroyed, and the Voice Unsold Foundation will be seen as a marketing stunt to compensate for guilt. Marcella leaned in, her eyes cold. "I'll give you a choice, Caleb. You break up with her publicly and discreetly, and use your influence to make this story and the ring disappear. Or I leak the report and you lose everything. Your image, your foundation, and the woman you claim to love will be seen as an opportunist." Caleb was in a dead end. He couldn't risk Isabella's work, Lara's life, and the credibility of the entire foundation. He needed time to investigate thoroughly. He needed to know the truth, but his love for Isabella prevented him from confronting her directly, fearing that the truth would destroy her. "I need a week, Marcella, to process this, and to decide. But I'm not coming back to you," he said, his voice choked with pain. "A week, Caleb, the clock is ticking. And remember, I don't want your life. I want you back," Marcella concluded, leaving the cafe with the cold satisfaction of someone who had just shot a poisoned arrow. Caleb returned home with the weight of the world on his shoulders. He looked at Isabella, so dedicated to the foundation, and couldn't conceive that she could be the daughter of a thief, or that the golden ring was a stain on her story of dignity. Doubt gnawed at him. He began to thoroughly investigate his own family's past and the disappearance of his sister Eliza, 20 years earlier. He needed answers that went beyond the coldness of a report. Isabella, sensing the change in Caleb's behavior, the distance in his eyes, confronted him. "What's happening, Caleb? You're pulling away. Is it media pressure? Is it Marcella? I know this love story is a facade to protect us, but our feelings are real." Caleb hugged her, guilt crushing him. "It's the pressure, Isabella. I'm a businessman, and all of this is a risk, but I love you. I love your courage, and I will protect you. I just need some time to resolve some family business." He avoided the topic of the ring, but began to ask about her mother, about her illness, about the period when they lost their home. Isabella described the struggle, dropping out of psychology school to care for her mother and brother Julian. She mentioned that her mother had worked sporadically in family homes at the time, but never mentioned the Matthews family. Omission or lie? Caleb didn't know. Caleb's investigation led him back to old documents from his sister's accident. He reviewed the testimonies, the reports, and found a note his father had ignored. A witness who claimed to have seen the girl Eliza alive, being removed from the accident scene by an unknown woman who seemed panicked. This woman wore a coat identical to the one Isabella's mother wore in old photos. The revelation was an electric shock. What if Isabella's mother hadn't stolen the ring, but instead saved his sister? What if the disappearance of the ring was linked to the rescue of the girl and not to a theft? Caleb sought out his father. Mr. Matthews was a stern man who had buried the trauma of Eliza's disappearance under layers of work and coldness. Caleb pressed him about the domestic worker hired at the time. His father hesitated, the memory painful. Yes, we hired a woman, Amelia. She was good, but she disappeared shortly after. My wife was distraught over the loss of the ring, the only thing left of the family. We presumed Amelia had stolen it. And the ring is with Isabella, Dad. She is Amelia's daughter. And Amelia disappeared shortly after Eliza's accident. Not to steal, Dad, but to disappear, perhaps, to protect someone. Mr. Matthews exploded in fury. Don't give me your detective stories, Caleb. Eliza is gone! That woman, Amelia, and this Isabella are just scammers after our fortune. His father's refusal to accept the truth strengthened Caleb's conviction. He needed to confront Isabella, not to accuse her of theft, but to unravel the mystery. At home, Caleb placed the golden ring on the table. I know where it came from, Isabella. I know my mother lost it when your mother worked in our house. I know she found it, but don't tell me it was on the street. Isabella paled. She had kept this secret her whole life, the only detail that stained her story of honor. It wasn't stolen, Caleb. Never. My mother was an honest woman. She found it in the trash, wrapped in a napkin just before we left, the day we learned we were going to be homeless. She said it was destiny, that it was a promise that things would get better, that it was the only valuable thing we had left. Caleb looked into her eyes, the intensity of his love and the gravity of the situation in balance. And why did she quit and disappear so quickly, Isabella? She saw something, didn't she? On the day of the accident, the day my sister disappeared. Your mother was there, and she saw Eliza. The shock hit Isabella with the force of a punch. Lara, who was drawing on the floor, lifted her head, frightened by the tension. Isabella broke down, the tears she had held back for years rolling down her face. My mother. She never told me everything. She just said I was her only treasure and that I needed to be strong. But I remember fragments, Caleb. I was 9. On the day of the accident, my mother was packing. She told me to go play in the garden. I was near the fence when I saw the car. Your parents' car. Isabella's voice was a painful whisper. I saw the dust, the noise, and I saw my mother running. She came back later, pale, with the ring in her hand and a girl in her arms. A girl who wasn't me, but who was dressed like me. She said the girl was scared but alive. She made me swear under the ring that I would never tell anyone about the girl. She said we had to disappear, that the girl was safe. She told me the parents had gone. Caleb felt the ground disappear. His sister hadn't died. She had been saved by Isabella's mother. His mother took her from the scene, fearing that if she were returned to the rich family, she would be used as evidence, or perhaps out of fear that her parents would reject her. For some reason, Isabella's mother didn't know. And this girl? Where is she, Isabella? Caleb asked, hope flooding him. Isabella looked at Lara, who, hearing her name, smiled. Caleb, my mother. She gave me the girl to care for. At the time, she was dying of sadness and illness. She told me she was my only treasure, my last act of dignity, and that I had to raise her as my own. Caleb looked at Lara. The child had his mother's eyes and the smile he only saw in old photos of his sister. Eliza. The revelation was a lightning bolt. Lara was not Isabella's biological daughter. She was the child Isabella's mother had rescued from the accident. Lara was Eliza Matthews, his missing sister raised on the streets under the guardianship of the woman he loved. The silence in the room was deafening. Caleb knelt before Lara, his eyes welling up. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The woman he loved was not the daughter of a thief. She was the daughter of his sister's savior, and the girl he protected was the missing piece of his own story. Marcella was about to release the report, but what she had was not a theft, but a miracle of dignity and sacrifice. Caleb looked at Isabella, love and gratitude overflowing in his gaze. You didn't sell me the ring, Isabella. You gave me back my family. You gave me back my sister. They needed to act fast. Marcella was ready to detonate the bomb. Caleb called her, pretending to accept her proposal. I'm going to break everything off with Isabella, Marcella, but I need one last meeting to formalize the termination of the Foundation's contract. You and I in my Fifth Avenue office tomorrow at 10 a.m. Marcella smiled, victorious. She thought she had won. that money and blackmail had prevailed over love and dignity. Caleb and Isabella spent the night awake, orchestrating the final plan. The truth would be revealed, but on the stage they chose the headquarters of the Voice Unsold Foundation. Dignity would be their weapon. The next morning, Marcella arrived at Caleb's office in the heart of Fifth Avenue, confident. She expected to see defeat on Isabella's face, who waited for her, seated beside Caleb. "I'm glad reason prevailed, Caleb," Marcella said coldly. "What we need to do now is negotiate Isabella's exit and silence the media." "There will be no negotiation, Marcella," Caleb said, his voice firm. "There will be a revelation." He pressed a button, and the meeting room screen, which usually displayed financial charts, showed the emblem of the Voice Unsold Foundation. And then the photo of the golden ring. "You were right, Marcella," Isabella began, looking her in the eyes, fearless. "This ring isn't mine. It belongs to the Matthews family, and it was found by my mother on the day of the accident that led to the death of Caleb's sister 20 years ago." Marcella smiled, preparing to deliver the blow of the theft. "I knew it. The thief's daughter." "The Savior's daughter," Caleb retorted, interrupting her. "My mother, Isabella's mother, didn't steal. She rescued a child who was abandoned, my sister, Eliza, and raised her as her own daughter, with the only treasure she had left, dignity and the ring as proof of her origin. The girl she raised on the street, the child I protect, Lara, is Eliza Matthews." The screen displayed Lara's photo next to an old photo of Eliza. The resemblance was undeniable. Marcella staggered backward, the realization dawning. Her revenge had led to a family reunion. "You didn't destroy me, Marcella," Isabella concluded, raising the ring. "You helped me prove that dignity and truth always prevail over lies and self-interest. And this ring is not proof of a theft. It is proof of a miracle." Marcella left the room in silence, defeat crushing her vanity. The news spread, but this time the narrative was of a family reunion, of love that overcame trauma, of dignity that resisted the streets. The story of Isabella and Caleb was no longer a media romance, but an epic of redemption. Lara, the girl in the red beanie, finally returned to her biological family, but with the mother who raised her, Isabella, by her side, now as Caleb's wife. The Voice Unsold Foundation became the largest and most respected social project in the country. The revelation on Fifth Avenue had been the peak of emotion, the moment when truth, like a dammed river, broke through the dike of lies and intrigue. Lara, the girl in the red beanie, was, in fact, Eliza Matthews, Caleb's sister, whom everyone believed to have died. Isabella's mother, in an act of sacrifice and dignity, had not stolen. She had saved the girl and raised her, protected by the invisibility of the streets, using the golden ring not as proof of a crime, but as a talisman of her origin. The shock of the truth resonated not only in Caleb and Isabella's lives, but throughout New York society. The media, which had previously villainized Isabella and ridiculed Caleb, now knelt before a story of love, sacrifice, and redemption. The Voice Unsold Foundation transformed from a risky project into a national symbol of hope and autonomy. Marcella, defeated and exposed in her malice, tried to defend herself, claiming she had been manipulated by the detective. However, the force of truth was overwhelming. Her parents, fearing scandal and association with the attempted blackmail, distanced her from their businesses. She lost not only Caleb, but her own power base, proving that self-interest and coldness in the end lead to loneliness. The reunion of Lara Eliza with her biological parents, Mr. and Mrs. Matthews, was indescribably emotional. Mrs. Matthews, in particular, who had carried the pain of the disappearance and the guilt of the lost ring for 20 years, finally found peace. Seeing the ring in her hand, returned by Isabella, she understood the sacrifice of Amelia, Isabella's mother, and the nobility of her new daughter. Isabella was embraced by the Matthews family, not as an intruder, but as the heroine who had kept the family together. Her psychology degree, abandoned years ago, was now the foundation of her work at the foundation. She was no longer the variable to be tested. She was the solution to the coldness and skepticism of a world driven by numbers. With the truth revealed, Isabella and Caleb could finally live their love without the shadow of lies. They married in a simple ceremony, at the community center where the foundation had been announced, symbolizing the union of two worlds, that of wealth and that of the streets, that of the algorithm and that of the heart. Lara Eliza, happy and secure, had 2 fathers and 2 mothers, a living testament that love and family are built with bonds that go beyond blood. Julian, Isabella's brother, found his purpose in the Foundation. He became Isabella's right-hand man, using his street experience to create aid programs that truly respected people's autonomy. He redeemed himself, proving that dignity was indeed the greatest currency. The story moved through time. 5 years passed. The Voice Unsold Foundation became a global success story. Isabella and Caleb worked side by side, she as the voice and he as the structure, proving that capitalism could have a soul and that welfare could have intelligence. Lara was a happy child, carrying in her name the strength of a warrior, Lara, and the heritage of a family, Eliza. However, destiny, as in any good drama, held one last twist. At a charity dinner for the Foundation, Isabella was approached by an older man, with a tired but kind demeanor and gentle eyes. He observed her with an intensity that made her recoil. "Forgive me." "I am Dr. Richard Taylor," the man said. "I've been following you from afar. Your story is inspiring, but there's something I need to tell you, Isabella. Something that connects to your mother, Amelia." Isabella led him to a reserved corner. The name Richard Taylor was not unfamiliar to her. She had seen it in old documents from the psychology college she had abandoned. He had been her professor before she had to drop everything. "When your mother, Amelia, was in the hospital before she passed away," Dr. Taylor began hesitantly, "I visited her. She was scared, but there was something she wanted me to know in case something happened. She gave me an envelope and made me promise that I would only give it to you when I knew you were safe," with a voice. Dr. Taylor handed Isabella a yellowed envelope. She opened it with trembling hands. Inside there was a final text, written in her mother Amelia's unmistakable handwriting. It wasn't a manifesto. It was a confession, the final climax of the plot. "My sweet Isabella, if you are reading this, you have won. You are the strong woman I knew you would be. I didn't tell you the whole truth about the girl, Eliza. Not out of distrust, but out of fear," the text read. "Yes, I saved her from the accident, and yes, I raised her as my own. But there was another reason for me to disappear. The day I found her, the girl had a serious head injury, and I, as a former nurse, realized she would need constant care. I read the newspapers. The Matthews were powerful. I feared that if I returned her, they would use her as a bargaining chip in some power dispute or hide her, fearing scandal. I stole her from death, but I also stole her from a life I wasn't sure would be safe." The confession continued, revealing the twist that linked Amelia to the Matthews family in an even deeper way. "But the heaviest secret is about you, my Isabella. I didn't just work in the Matthews house to clean up the mess. I worked for Mr. Matthews, Caleb's father, years before. I was his personal assistant before he got married. We had an affair, a brief affair but with consequences. I discovered the pregnancy shortly after I left. I left so as not to ruin his life and mine. I raised you alone with the strength of a lioness." Isabella felt the world collapse. Mr. Matthews, Caleb's father, was her biological father. The CEO who had tested her, the man she loved, was her half-brother. Lara Eliza was not just her adopted sister. She was also her cousin. The love story that had overcome social distance and past traumas was, in fact, a drama of blood and a carefully guarded family secret. The argumentative revelation was devastating, yet incredibly captivating. The golden ring was not just proof of a rescue. It was the blood tie that united Isabella to the Matthews family, and the final piece of a 20-year puzzle. Isabella took the letter to Caleb. He read it, pale, the CEO's mind seeking logic where there was only passion and destiny. He was a man who needed numbers, but life had given him a Greek tragedy script. We are siblings?" Caleb asked, his voice hoarse, horror mixed with acceptance. Isabella hugged him, the only thing she could do. "By blood, yes. By upbringing, no. But Caleb, life united us through dignity, not blood. We built our story with heart, not with a genetic code. I love the man you have become, the man who respected me when the world spat on me. The love we feel is greater than any past mistake." They decided, after days of reflection and pain, to keep the secret of Isabella's paternity restricted to themselves and Caleb's parents, who, after reading the letter, were forced to confront their own mistakes. Mr. Matthews accepted Isabella as his daughter, in silence, finding redemption by finally recognizing Amelia's worth and Isabella's sacrifice. The couple then took the final step in accepting their destiny. They continued as husband and wife, asserting that the love they had built based on dignity and choice was stronger than any unchosen blood tie. The story of Isabella and Caleb was no longer about charity or redemption, but about the strength of identity and love that defies logic, prejudice, and finally, destiny itself. The end of the story was not the end of a fairy tale, but the beginning of a real life, where bonds of affection were more valuable than biological ties. They dedicated themselves to the Voice Unsold Foundation, teaching that the greatest legacy is the right to decide who you are, regardless of where you came from. The last scene takes place on Fifth Avenue 5 years later. Isabella and Caleb walk hand in hand, with Lara Eliza between them, now a smiling preteen. They stop in front of the place where it all began. A smile crosses between them. "You didn't sell me the ring, Isabella," Caleb whispers. "You bought my soul." "And you, Caleb," Isabella replies, looking at the gleam of the ring on her finger, "you gave me my voice." Dear viewers and fans of this emotional journey, if Isabella and Caleb's fate caught you by surprise, if you cried with the revelation of the golden ring and rooted for this love that defied all rules, you are part of our family. Life, like this story, is full of twists that Caleb Matthews' logic could never calculate. And that's why we love drama. To continue exploring stories that prove that the heart is our best algorithm, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Leave your like if Isabella's dignity inspired you, and comment below. If you were in Caleb's shoes, would you have returned the ring? Don't miss our next content, where real life and destiny meet. The stage of emotions awaits you,